In this lecture, we're going to talk about crystal structure, or the structure of solids on a molecular level. So as you know, in solids, the atoms or molecules arrange themselves in highly ordered structures. These close packed structures are called crystal lattices. Now, there are many, many different examples of crystal lattice structures, but we're going to talk today about three different specific types: simple cubic, body-centered cubic, and face-centered cubic. In order to describe them, we're going to use the concept of a unit cell. The smallest repeating unit of a crystal lattice is known as a unit cell. So a crystal lattice consists of an extended network of many different unit cells repeating over and over again. So I want to look at these three examples: simple cubic, body-centered cubic, and face-centered cubic, and focus on the unit cell for each. Okay, so let's start with the unit cell for the simple cubic. So in the simple cubic structure, the unit cell is, as the name implies, a cube. And at the corner of each cube, you have an atom or an ion or some kind of particle. Okay, so a cube has 8 corners, and at each of those 8 corners, you have a particle. Now, those particles are held together in this highly ordered, simple cubic structure. Now, that's what the unit cell looks like. But the lattice structure, okay, so here in this second column, we have the lattice structure. The lattice structure consists of many different unit cells, all beside each other and building up in this vast three-dimensional network. Oops. So what these images on the left here are showing you are kind of cartoons of what the unit cell looks like here and here. In reality, the atoms are fairly close to each other. So this cartoon of this space-filling unit cell gives you a better idea of what it actually looks like if you kind of cut away all the parts of the atom that are not included in the unit cell. So as this image shows, a unit cell is going to contain only a fraction of the atoms, for example, on the corners here. This atom on the corner of the simple unit cell is going to be shared by 8 other unit cells. So the atom is split into 1/8. So what that means is that for a simple cubic unit cell, let's do some quick arithmetic here. The simple cubic unit cell, you have, well, here, I'll just draw another version of it quickly. It's actually a good exercise for you to draw this because it will make more sense after you have a nice little picture in it. Okay, so we have the 8 atoms at the 8 corners of the cube. So those blue atoms are 8 atoms. Each of them essentially in the repeating lattice structure, each of them is at the center of an octahedron. So there are 1/8 of the atom per unit cell. So that means that cumulatively, there is 1 atom net per simple cubic unit cell. So for simple cubic, that's relatively easy to see. Let's now look at the second type of unit cell, the body-centered cubic. So the body-centered cubic is similar to the simple cubic. There's a cubic unit cell, and there is an atom at each corner, at each of the 8 corners. But in addition to those corner atoms, there's also an atom dead in the center. So you can kind of see that atom in the center. Hence the name body-centered cubic. It's like a simple cubic, except with an additional atom in the center. Here's what the larger lattice structure would look like. Okay, so we can automatically see that there are more atoms. And here is what it looks like if you kind of shave off the parts of the atom that are not part of the unit cell. So here, the corner atoms have 1/8 of themselves as part of the unit cell, but the body-centered atom is entirely within the unit cell. So if we're going to do the math for that one, it's a bit different. So this is the simple cubic. Let's talk about the body-centered cubic, BCC. I'm going to call it the body-centered cubic. The body-centered cubic cell is also cubic. And like the simple cubic, it has those 4 corner atoms. But in addition to those 4 corner atoms, it has an atom dead in the center. So you have to consider the corner atoms the same way you did for the simple cubic. You have 8 atoms. 1/8 of them per cell yields 1 net atom per unit cell. But you also have 1 full atom in the center of the unit cell. So that gives you another atom per each unit cell. So you have 2 atoms net, 2 atoms total per unit cell. All right, let's look at the final example that we're going to talk about, which is the face-centered cubic. It might be a little bit hard to see in this drawing, but a face-centered cubic is like a simple cubic. So looking up at the simple cubic, you kind of have this basic structure here with the 8 atoms at the 8 corners of the cube. But in addition to those 8 corner atoms, on each of the 6 faces of the cube, you have what's called a face-centered atom. The best way to visualize that is to look at this cartoon here. So you have the 8 corner atoms with 1/8 of themselves at each corner, but the face-centered atoms are splitting themselves in half between this unit cell and the unit next door. So a cube has 6 faces. You have 6 face-centered atoms, and each of those atoms is contributing half of itself to the unit cell. So let's do the arithmetic here. So we can see, let me move this down a wee bit. We'll talk about that summary table in just a moment. So let's do the math for the face-centered cubic unit cell. Once again, I'm going to draw a cube. And in this cube, we have 8 corner atoms, as before in the simple cubic. So there are my 8 corner atoms. And then on each face, each of the 6 faces of the cube, I also have an atom. So the arithmetic is the same for the corner atoms, 8 corner atoms. 1/8 of them is, 1/8 of each of them is contributed. So that's 1 atom cumulatively per unit cell for the corner atoms. So we also have 6 face-centered atoms, each contributing half of themselves to the unit cell. Oops. Each contributing half of themselves to the unit cell. 6 times a half is 3 atoms. So in a face-centered cubic, you have a net number of atoms of 4 per cell. So 4 atoms net per unit cell. We can see that summarized in this table here. So if the position of the atom is on the corner, then that means that atom is shared by 8 unit cells. So the fraction of it that is contained within a single unit cell is going to be 1/8. For the face-centered atoms, a face-centered atom is shared by 2 unit cells, so it contributes 1/2 of itself to the unit cell. The body-centered or internal atom is entirely within the unit cell, so the whole thing counts as being contributing towards the unit cell. Finally, if an atom is on the edge of a cube, and what I mean by the edge here is my cubic unit cell. An edge-centered atom would be here on one of the edges. Okay, so these would be edge-centered atoms. Here I'm drawing one on each of these edges. So an edge-centered atom is going to be shared by 4 adjacent unit cells, and that means that each edge-centered atom contributes 1/4 of itself to the single unit cell. So you can use this kind of arithmetic to determine the cell contents, and that will help you figure out what the formulas are based on unit cell structure for different solids.